This example asks us to sketch the graph of f of x equals log to the base 3 of x minus 2. A sketch needs to be a good representation without being exact. What matters is that you show all of the important features of the graph clearly and correctly. We will begin by drawing in the axes. It's a good idea to use a ruler, as this will get your diagram off to a good start and at least make it look neat. Once you have drawn the axes, remember to label them. The horizontal axis is the independent variable, in this case x. I'm going to label the vertical axis y, even though the question uses the notation f of x. It would seem to me that both notations would be acceptable. Now that we have drawn the axes, we need to think about what are the features of this graph that are important, that we would need to show in a sketch. The first, of course, is the shape, so you need to be familiar with the shape of the log graph. It's usually like this, but of course it will be reflected sometimes, either left, right or up, down. The other feature that's very important is, of course, the vertical asymptote. So we need to think about where this will be. This graph has been translated 2 steps to the right, and so instead of being at the vertical axis, this time the vertical asymptote will be at x equals 2. So I'm going to put that in. Again, I'm going to use a ruler to try and get the diagram off to a good start at least. It's conventional to use a dotted line for asymptotes, and because we're trying to explain to the marker that we know exactly what this graph is like, we need to label this, and the label would be x equals 2. Next, have a think about a feature such as an intercept. Before this graph was translated, it would not have intercepted with the vertical axis at all. It has been moved 2 steps to the right, and so there is clearly going to be no intercept on the y-axis. The intercept on the x-axis will occur when we get 1 in this bracket, because log to any base of 1 is 0. The value of x that gives us this is 3, so I'm going to mark that in next as the point 30 and label it again, because we want to show everybody that we know what this graph really is like. I placed 30 approximately in the right place. There isn't a need to measure it exactly, because again, a sketch is trying to show the main features of the graph. Finally, we come to actually drawing the graph. There are many pieces of advice that you will get about how to do this effectively. Remember, what you're trying to do is show what the graph is like, not plot it exactly. I find it best to actually have your hand on the inside of any curve you're trying to do. It seems to be easier to draw your hand around like that than it is to try and push it outwards to draw a curve. So I'm going to start. You do it in one go, I think. And I've missed the intercept, so I'm going to do the easy bit. I'm actually going to move the intercept and not the graph. And now you have a look at it and just check that it has all the features that you want. So let's have a look at this sketch just to finally check that we've done it the way we want it. We need to have the right shape. Log graphs are basically like this. The thing to watch out for is that down here this is an asymptote, and out to the right the graph does not asymptote to a horizontal asymptote but carries on going up. The further you go to the right, the slower it goes up, and therefore the less steep it becomes. So your graph would need to show that, and I think mine does. In respect of representing asymptotes in this area down here, there are 2 things to watch out for. One of them is a very common mistake that will frequently lose you marks. I would think always would lose you marks. One of them is to have the asymptote actually intersected by the graph, or even worse, crossed by the graph, like that. Neither of those is correct, and both you should expect them to lose you marks. The other rather more subtle error that we see quite often with these sketches is like this. The graph comes down quite nicely, but at the last minute it curls away like that. I've exaggerated that a bit, but that's a thing to watch out for and to avoid, because it isn't what the graph does and therefore should not be a feature of your sketch. One last look and I think I'm satisfied, and we're done.